Greetings and welcome along to the New Zealand Tech Podcast. I'm your host, Paul Spain. Now today, very pleased to welcome to the studio, Hengjie Wang. Welcome along, Hengjie. How are you?
Good, thank you. Yourself?
Great. Now, maybe you can just fill our listeners in on where you fit into this big, wide world of technology. What's your role? What do you do?
Sure. I'm Hengjie. I'm the CEO, co-founder of Cammy. Cammy is a digital classroom platform. It helps kids all around the world, especially in the United States, to take their work, complete their work, and collaborate with their teachers and improve their learning outcomes.
Great. Well, I look forward to diving into that a little bit later on in the show. But I guess the thing, whenever Cammy comes up in a conversation that I think is pretty cool for a New Zealand startup, is you've got literally millions of users around the world. This is not, something where you just started and you've got a handful of users, but it's really been adopted on a really broad scale, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're almost probably days away from hitting 8 million users.
Wow.
So that's exciting. You heard it first here.
That's so cool. Excellent. Well, look forward to diving into that. Before we do, let's look a little bit at the tech news of the week. And I wanted to start with looking at some of the sort of, I guess, bigger story highlights that have attracted my attention over the last few days. First up was talk that SpaceX are going to launch private citizens into orbit. Now, this isn't. It is exciting. It's very cool. But I think it sounds like we're actually getting close to this being able to be a reality, because I think it was maybe supposed to happen maybe 2 or 3 years ago, in terms of the original suggestions from Elon Musk, but that's been pushed back. But of course now they're at the point where they've been doing they've done enough test flights and cargo missions up to the International Space Station, taking things up there for NASA. Mm-hmm. And it looks like SpaceX basically is just a few months away from taking the first US astronauts up to the International Space Station, and then they're going to be moving, I imagine, reasonably quickly. And these sort of, I guess, these time frames aren't usually that quick as far as space is concerned, but into taking people up and letting them get up into space, which. Yeah, we've been waiting, I don't know how many years for Virgin Galactic. There's Kiwis that have been, signed up for that.
Yeah, $200,000 a ticket, I think.
Yeah, but it might be that SpaceX are going to be doing this sooner. Now, if you look at the cost of putting their Crew Dragon up, I mean, it's really big bucks to launch this stuff. Certainly well into the tens of millions. So these are not going to be cheap flights, and I guess it will be a very different kettle of fish to what Virgin Galactic are doing, which is. Looks more like an aeroplane that's going to the edge of space rather than, I think SpaceX are, they're going right up there
to low Earth orbit.
Yeah. So pretty exciting.
I mean, it's a lot cheaper than the $80-90 million they'd pay for the Soyuz, and that's per seat.
Yes, that's true.
Yeah, so I think SpaceX is like $50-60 million per seat,
and
probably even cheaper if they really wanted
nothing.
to. Yeah.
Now the other headline, which is I guess what's one thing that's possible today, is jetpacks, and there's been a bit of footage online of this guy Vince Raffet, who set an altitude record in Dubai in the last few days, and he's just such a cool jetpack. I mean, basically, makes him look like an aeroplane with these wings on his back and jets. It's just nuts, going well over 200 k's an hour.
Jesus, crazy.
Pretty cool. Unfortunately, I think the Martin jetpack didn't quite get there commercially. I don't know whether some of these other products are ultimately going to be viable businesses, but it's certainly pretty cool seeing the technology work and with people attached and the people surviving. I think in this case he had to land with a parachute, so it's not quite there in terms of landing yet, but it's all moving along nicely. Now, coronavirus or COVID-19 is causing all sorts of havoc, and one of the things that we've learned to expect is supply shortages, and Apple have come out and indicated that there's going to be some some challenges in those regards.
Mm-hmm.
I think anybody involved in acquiring technology should be mindful over the next little while. If you need physical hardware, laptops or anything, the large majority of that comes out of China.
I mean, anything out of China.
Yeah. It's possibly going to be impacted. Now, look, for China's economy's sake, we hope that the impact isn't too much, but there'll be a flow on to all sorts. If we can't get our hands on hardware as we need it, so certainly something to be mindful of. But don't go nuts and order a whole lot of stuff, because then there'll be
order a bunch of iPhones,
none for anybody else. So I guess it's that sort of panic buying that's created issues with getting face masks and hazmat suits and hand sanitizers and so on as well, right? But fortunately, New Zealand hasn't been drawn in with any infections at this stage, which is encouraging. Well, not on New Zealand soil anyway. And then the last thing, and sort of the quick highlights that caught my attention is Microsoft with their Defender, which is their antivirus, anti-malware software, which of course started out as sort of a freebie bundled into Windows, and it really took Microsoft many years, and I think a lot of antivirus vendors in the early days sort of presumed Microsoft might come into their space. It did take a very long time to happen. Now Microsoft are really in a place where their what started out as Windows Defender is an important part of their subscription revenue streams, and now it's coming to iOS and Android, already available on Windows and Mac, and this is very much the I guess the new Microsoft as we've seen in recent years. That
apps
is
and services.
Yeah, they're
Azure.
They're not so worried about whether Windows is the best. They're actually making their money building these apps and services on top of anything and everything that's I guess mainstream. So really interesting to see. Have no idea what their strategy is around how they do that on iOS, because doing what traditional antivirus software has done hasn't really been possible on iOS or on the iPhone or iPad. So it'll be curious to see what they actually bring to the table.
I mean, I could take a guess. You've got a bunch of other security companies like Cloudflare do this with their VPN software.
Yep.
Where they will insert a profile into your iPhone.
Yeah.
And then all your traffic might get redirected to their servers and filtered. And
yeah. Yep. That's certainly a possibility, isn't it? And I mean, I'm sure there will be a number of things that they can bring to the table, but it's unlikely to be quite as deep as what we see on other platforms. That said, to a pretty big degree, your individual apps and bits and pieces, keep reasonably isolated, but there are certainly things to look out for. And then the other thing, New Zealand related, is that the date has been set, March 30th, for the 5G auction locally. So that will help us be in a position in New Zealand where 5G is potentially much more broadly available. Of course, Vodafone already pretty heavily invested in that space, and Spark as well. But of course, Spark have been just using 5G for. I guess you would say some sort of fixed wireless access. They didn't have it available for mobiles, and Vodafone are I would say reasonably early on in their journey, but they've certainly got north of I don't know what number of cell sites they're up to now, but in the December time frame they were around 100 cell sites. But once this spectrum has been sliced and diced up, and it's just I guess this one's just a short term and an auction for a 2-year sort of window, but I think it's pleasing to see. I don't want to see New Zealand sort of falling behind on connectivity, right? We are starting to run into challenges there. Of course, when you look at it, we probably have a little bit of a benefit compared to many other countries when we look at our in-home and office access in terms of just how broadly available the ultra-fast broadband is, and it would certainly put us, if I guess largish numbers of people had to work from home, as we've seen in China. I think that experience in New Zealand would be dramatically better than what I've heard that it's been like in China, where things have been really quite heavily bandwidth constrained at times, and it's been a pretty poor experience. And of course we could look at our cousins over in Australia and talk about what their experience might be like, but we don't need to bash them today. Now on to other news. Well, there just seems to be a lot going on from a cybersecurity perspective, and I guess it's fair to say it's not all looking that great. One thing I was reading about last week, which we've heard things a little bit like this in the past, but basically extortionists threatening owners of websites with that are running Google AdSense to generate their revenue. So their ads are basically being delivered to them via Google, and Google's paying them. But basically extortionists coming along and threatening those sites that they're going to deliver them with bad traffic that's really going to mess with their relationship with Google.
You think maybe this is something that Google might be able to filter out as a signal, because I think it's fraudulent traffic, right? Which Google already has this line item in their billing for AdSense or payments for AdSense. They say this is how much we excluded because of fraudulent traffic. You'd think that maybe Google was already onto it. And able to do something about it.
It was interesting reading about it, because look, if you get a communication with that, you being threatened like that, surely you can loop Google in. But the risk is if you don't manage to communicate that to Google, and then you do get hit at such an extent that then Google sort of blocks your revenue, then you'd be in a messy situation. But look, as a general rule, I would be suggesting that people don't give in to these sort of folks, and
you just enable them more.
It's not going to be helpful for anyone. So apparently requests sort of the case I was reading about was talking about requesting US $5,000 worth of Bitcoin.
Wow.
So Yeah, not a nice position to be in, but yeah, definitely getting a hold of Google. I think this is an area where Google would be very interested in making sure they get good outcomes for everyone. So if you do get hit by that, that would certainly be my recommendation. Now, there were a couple of other things on the, and that's probably not quite in the normal cybersecurity area, but we had about a week or more back now, of course, news came through from Generate, who are one of the Kiwi Saver funds, around their challenges, shall we say, and that a big chunk of their data was compromised. Apparently, data for 26,000 of their people that had their Kiwi Saver with Generate, which
so the identity, I think, was it leaked?
Yeah. So my understanding is they were able to get at a bunch of personal information. I think birth dates and bits and pieces, physical address, IRD number,
Wow.
Bank statements, and identification. Now, I think when an organisation is storing copies of passports and driver's license. I mean, personally, I'm really uncomfortable if anyone asks for those documents, and I always try and work out a way not to give them an electronic copy, and I've jumped through hoops to how can we avoid this. Unfortunately, with the anti-money laundering rules, I think in many cases they have to have that. They have to at a minimum cite this stuff, but usually there's a whole process they have to go through, and they generally end up keeping copies of of these documents. But if I was to join up the dots, and I could be, completely wrong, but I guess if I was to guess, and I'll be curious what your thoughts are, they've got about 100,000 members, but 26,000 of them had their data leaked.
Yep.
I'm wondering whether, hey, this is the online portal, people have gone in, uploaded their stuff, and it's actually just been left sitting there on a
S3 server,
on a web server or what have you. There's never
That's so
been
common.
any encryption wrapped around that data, or it's just left there. I mean, it sounds quite similar to what we heard with the Ministry of Heritage and Culture last year. With that was just a WordPress site that I guess someone had probably whipped up pretty quickly, and a few standard plugins and blah de blah, and hope it works, and probably not particularly well secured, I'm guessing. But for what is the 10th or 11th biggest Kiwi Saver fund in New Zealand to get caught on that basis, doesn't sound very good. Now there could be a whole lot more to it, but
I mean, data security is a challenge, right? Like you have, I run a cloud-based company. We deal with a lot of children private identifying information, so like names, email addresses. We always try and minimize the amount of data that we collect. But if you're a KiwiSaver fund, then not only do you have to keep all that information, you probably have to keep backups of all that information, so that if you lose it, you've got some backup somewhere that you don't lose continuity of business. And that's really, it's a huge challenge. And the last thing you want is to go onto Amazon Web Services, their storage platform, and check a mark that says encrypt at rest, because it does nothing. And it does something, but very little to hackers like this that might be operating at a different layer. So it's, I feel sorry for them, and also for all the 26,000 people that have their identities leaked. That's bad. Yeah,
it is, and the impact of that potentially can be last for a lifetime, right? So it's not a great position to be in. And look, this stuff isn't all easy to address, but I guess one thing I've particularly noticed in the little while is because my technology services firm Gorilla does quite a lot of technology audits and cybersecurity audits. Is we see often what state a lot of our particularly smaller to medium organisations are in, and
Is it scary?
It just blows my mind how shocking it often is, and and this is many cases where there's a well-known, reputable technology provider in there, but somehow basics are sort of slipping through the cracks, and I guess if you think of a smaller KiwiSaver provider, not that they're tiny. I mean, they've got $1.8 billion, in terms of investment. So I wouldn't say that's a particularly tiny organisation, and they might not have a lot of people, but I think it's pretty disappointing that they were hit in the way they were hit, and I hope that people heed this, and we start seeing a bit of a step up. And look, they may have done just about everything right, but that's quite possibly not the case based on what we know know so far.
And I think it comes down to consumers don't really they don't go and pick your KiwiSaver based on its security history or what its audits say, right? You and me might do that, but traditional consumers won't. And I think that's a big problem, is like they're not incentivized to do those sorts of things.
Well, it's going to cost them because they're having to replace those, for those 26,000 people, they have to get them new passports, a new driver's license. Obviously, that's a real inconvenience as well for those 26,000 individuals. They're going to waive their KiwiSaver annual fee of $36 a year. So over a decade, you multiply that out by your 26,000 people times well, I don't know what the average is, but if it was 30 years, you're talking 26 million over that in terms of lost fees.
Yeah.
So it stacks up in terms of its impact. So there's a fair bit at stake there. I would say, and I certainly hope that we do start sort of heeding these things. And I mean, look, just the last 8 weeks or so, we've been hearing about so many incidents, toll holdings as well in New Zealand that got hit,
especially with elections coming up. So protecting those elections is going to be vital.
Yes, actually, talking about elections, there was some interesting news through about digital voting or electronic voting in elections, and Microsoft having a little bit of a role to play here, which I found quite fascinating because we've talked about this before, and I think sort of there's this feeling that it would be great if everybody could vote using electronic means, but fair to say that as a technologist or as technology people, we've generally had a pretty low level of confidence in what electronic voting can deliver, and I think it's fair to say there have been so many issues, particularly in the US, where we've seen them try and have these electronic voting machines, and they've been insecure and unreliable, and it just seems like it's been a load of rubbish. But Microsoft have been working on an open source project, and the idea is to create voting software that uses really strong encryption. They say they've used some of the world's brightest cryptographers, and they've invested extensively in auditing for security issues and so on. And they seem to have come up, if the news reports are to be believed, with a pretty good approach. And the way I take it is that this software, which available for I think on GitHub, and they've got a bug bounty program in there as well, in conjunction with, I think, there being printed copies and a number of ways of being able to verify votes whilst the votes are still kept secret.
So is this
sounds like quite a reasonable approach if they've got it right. Certainly compared to the existing vendors who are selling these voting machines and have then got their what appears to be dodgy, buggy software sitting on them.
Yeah,
what do you think? You read the story that was in on ZDNet. How do you feel? How much confidence have you got?
I think people have always been asking for, at least in the tech industry, some sort of open source software that can run, because voting software is really just software that runs on a tablet or on some sort of touchscreen device that you can go and press a button and say who you want to vote for.
Yep.
But the hard bit is not just the cryptography and the security, but also usability.
Yep.
The last thing you want is to have poor usability causing people to unintentionally vote for the wrong person.
Not good.
And that's happened in the past.
Yeah.
And
you got to drop down, and you forget to change the default entry, so whoever's in the top one gets the most votes. Yeah, not good. So I'll read out the key piece that described how it would work. First, a voter will select candidates on a touch screen and verify their choices. Second, the voter will print and review for accuracy a paper ballot, and then simultaneously receive a separate tracking code. Third, the voter will deposit their ballot into a ballot box for counting. So you've not only got that electronic copy, you've also still got the traditional paper copy. So from an auditing perspective, that you've got both covered. It's not just a purely electronic solution. Obviously, that still means someone has to go into a voting booth. It's not do it on your phone. But
not yet.
If this works well, and I don't know whether other people will jump in on board and and contribute, but. It sounds like we maybe we will head towards a future where we can get this stuff right. And there was an Xbox component that you mentioned.
I mean, I just wonder with all this hardware that we've got, phones, Google's got a security chip, Apple's got a T2 chip, whether you can find a way to securely, use that chip in such a way that you can go in and cryptographically go and submit a ballot from your phone.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know enough about encryption to know, but that could be really cool.
Yeah.
And then they had something about an Xbox accessory for accessibility.
Yeah.
To
it's quite cool.
Allow people to, I guess, with motor dysfunctions or whatever have you, to be able to submit a vote without needing to use those machines. That's very cool.
That's brilliant. Yeah. So the Xbox adaptive controller, I think, is designed for gamers with limited mobility, and if they can offer that as well, all the better. So we will see. Yes, again, it's a bit of the sort of the new Microsoft, isn't it? When they're producing open source software and making it
a whole new world.
It's like what? But we keep seeing more and more of this stuff going on.
Hey, if the software runs on Azure, then they're making money. So
yeah, that's true. That's true. There's always going to be a revenue angle in there from one aspect or another. Now, something that's been in the media for a little while, haven't discussed it, but I picked up some news again on it in the last few days, is the sale by the ISOC, or Internet Society, of the .org namespace. So this is all about being able to register .org domain names. And look, I possibly own a few myself in there amongst a few domain names.
So who are they selling to?
Yeah, well, this is interesting. So, the proposed purchaser, Ethos Capital, were paying, and I'm wondering if was it around 1.13 billion US dollars. But there's been a whole lot of sort of murkiness around this whole arrangement, and it's now come out that the advisory council to the Internet Society have basically been saying, no, you should halt this. It looked like it was very much a done deal. In fact, I saw locally Lance Wiggs did a whole blog post about it from a financial consideration and what he thought it was actually worth. So that was worth a read if you're interested in drilling into a little bit more. But I thought maybe this thing was all going and going to happen. But this suggests there's still a vote to come, and it may not be quite such a done deal. Looks like Ethos Capital have come out now also and offered to lock the price down, because the concern was
to raise prices.
You sell this thing off to a private equity firm, and then they work out, well, how do we make more money out of that? On that front, actually, we've probably got a few listeners who use LastPass. So LastPass got bought by LogMeIn, and then certainly the business type prices, I think, doubled.
Yes. I'm a LastPass user.
Right. Okay. So you got hit with that. Well, now LogMeIn, which includes LastPass, have got bought by another private equity firm. So someone told me today. Anyway, I haven't read the details myself. But yeah, one of the team here mentioned that yes, ownership's changed, and guess what? Another big price rise.
Wow.
So there's only so long you can do that stuff for, right?
Oh, I'm just glad CIA doesn't own LastPass.
Well, let's hope not. You don't always know who stands behind these firms, do you?
Yeah.
I think the CIA certainly made some sneaky investments in the past. I don't know if you can ever be 100% sure, and then depending on which country you're in, potential or the software or the vendor is from, depending on what their local pressures are like from military and spies and whatnot, that can make a difference. I don't know how much confidence we can have in any of this stuff.
Open source, right? You can roll your own.
Yes.
You can use something like Bitwarden and run your own Bitwarden RS server. Which would
not
work.
easy for your standard consumer, but there are certainly options out there, aren't there? Which is good. Yeah, certainly on that password front, there are a raft of other products, but I think that there's reasons why a lot of people use LastPass. It wasn't just the first product of its kind to gain a reasonable following. It's actually pretty good product, and works quite well both in the sort of consumer situations and in business situations. But not so great when if the prices get too sky high. I haven't had a look at them myself, so I'm not too sure how crazy all that's getting. Now, iOS 14, I was reading a piece in The Verge actually on, and I guess it was an opinion piece from Tom Warren in the UK, who's been on the show in the past, and he, I guess, was sort of drawing some lines in terms of comparing how much of a walled garden the Apple world is versus Android, and suggesting that maybe with iOS 14 we will see them, drop some of those walls a little bit. And as someone who uses both iOS and Android, certainly there's a little bit of an annoyance in that on an iPhone, you can't replace the default calendar, the default email. You can certainly run, other products, Gmail and Outlook and so on, but you click on a mail link and it's going to take you to Apple Mail, and it just wastes my time basically, because Apple Mail is not where my main email lies. So I hope that that Tom Warren's onto something here, and that we see a few changes. And of course, Apple has come under some pressure, some antitrust investigations. And it mentioned around Spotify and sort of the way
Tile and all those other companies.
Yeah. I mean, Tyler are they've done a great job to to build out this. What would you call it? Sort of, an ecosystem for tracking things. And in fact, I talked a few weeks ago about the new HP Dragonfly that I was trialing. Now they've already iterated, and there's a new one about to become available as well locally, and that one has Tile built in, and we're starting to see all these products that have got the Tile tech built in. So you've got and the more things that it happens to, the more people get on board with that platform, the more likely you are to be able to track something that you've lost, because a lot of people are running the app.
It's so convenient.
Yeah, it is convenient. I guess there's also an aspect that it's one of those things where there's a natural monopoly, but of course, because if you're trying to start something else and hardly anyone's running your app, that's not going to work very well. But of course, it looks like Apple are going to go in and do their own thing as well. So yeah, the way Apple sort of operates is increasingly sort of coming under attack. And the other one was around them having a monopoly on the App Store, which, if you look at Android, it's you can have other app stores, but of course on iOS you don't have too much choice. And of course, in most cases, Apple is taking a 30% cut of people's revenue, which is what creates those hassles for anyone that tries to buy audiobooks from Audible or buy Amazon stuff.
Netflix,
it's
the big
Netflix,
one where they removed the sign up here button.
It's just messy and confusing, right? But they've got to follow these rules. And look, it's business for Apple, and it's worked out rather well. They've built pretty much the biggest business on the planet, and often off the back of that success for of the iPhone. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how this pans out. Certainly hope Apple will play a little bit friendlier with other bits and pieces and lower those barriers with iOS 14.
You wonder whether they're, because of those competitive pressures antitrust pressures that you mentioned, whether they're leaking that information out just to try and get ahead of it.
Yeah, it's you could be right. It might help take a little bit of that heat off, you reckon?
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, one last thing before we before we hear a little bit about Cami. I find this new world of drones that can carry people, that's what I tend to call them, VTOLs, or vertical takeoff and landing craft being the more official terminology, quite interesting. And I was catching up with a friend from Singapore, was in town a few days ago, and he was talking about Volocopter and how they've got all this activity going on in Singapore, and lo and behold, there's been more news coming through, and apparently they're teaming up with Grab, and Grab, of course, are the I guess Uber alternative that's very common across Asia, and of course in lots of countries. Grab is your only option. You don't have Uber as an option.
They bought out Uber
at all. Yeah, there was an agreement to buy it out, but it's not everywhere. So when I went to when I was in Taipei, for instance, you could use Uber in Taipei, but you couldn't in say Philippines and so on. So interesting to see this activity going on, and their vehicles, they I guess they look quite similar in many ways to a traditional helicopter, except it's something like 18 rotors, and so it'll be pretty interesting to see how it develops. They're talking about setting up dozens of, they're calling them Volo ports across Singapore, with each with the capacity to handle 10,000 passengers a day.
Wow.
I mean, this is definitely that would be really a pretty impressive level if they can get to that sort of level. Multiply that out by dozens, and you're talking potentially over you could have over 100,000 passengers a day flying now. I haven't quite worked out that from a airspace perspective and all the other aspects, but
it could be amazing for the traffic jams.
It would just transform things, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Especially around Auckland at the moment is crazy from a traffic perspective. I don't know what it must be costing the economy, as well as the mental health issues it causes when people are stuck in their cars for hour or two a day to often travel quite short distances. So not that it's just Auckland that has those issues, but with all the roadworks and changes going on at the moment, it is it's the worst I can remember it ever.
Yeah, it's sometimes, I travel a lot and drive a lot in Asia, and whenever I go there and drive, I come back, I'm like, wow, this is no different. This is exactly like it is driving out in the Philippines or something else. Yeah. A lot faster. Yeah.
Well, I remember when Uber, started here, I think the minimum fare was something like, $5.50 or something, certainly reasonably early on, around that price point. And from our office at Studio near K Road, you kind of get, you get downtown for that minimum fare, and in some cases. But the other day, I heard about one of our team, catching an Uber, similar sort of distance, but the fare was more than 10 times that.
Wow.
So
$70?
Something like that. So, getting what used to cost $5 or $6 or whatever.
Well, if you're stuck in traffic for like 30 minutes or 40 minutes, I believe
you got to pay the drivers, right? And it's important that we make sure people are paid enough. But the issue here is around just how long it's taking. So if you could just go straight point to point. That might cost $70 to fly it, but you're going to get there a whole lot quicker. I'd pay the $70 rather than sit in a Uber for 30 to 60 minutes.
So here's a question for you: would you trust a helicopter flying above your head versus, let's say, a tunnel that has been drilled to point for you to go from A to B?
Well, I think your tunnel and a sort of ground or underground transport, you would expect to be safer than a traditional helicopter. But once the technology is right and mature, I would like to think that these vertical takeoff and landing craft will provide similar safety to what we see in commercial aircraft, which is safer than normal car travel. Of course, alongside that, we've got autonomous technologies and a lot of safety technologies from varying firms. So overall, hopefully, it all gets really safe, and you just pick what's right without having to even think about the safety, right?
Yeah, you don't have to think about whether that thing was serviced and whether something will fall on your head.
Yeah. Well, there's certainly, I think, a lot to be said for that electric, that move to electric, which is really what we're talking about with these, most of these vertical takeoff and landing type craft, and of course that really brings down the maintenance requirements. And if you've got 18 rotors as opposed to one.
One can go wrong.
There's
that's fine.
You're in a much safer vehicle, but maybe not to start with. But I would tend to imagine if they've done their job right and they put these things in the air, they should be pretty safe from the get go. All right. So. Tell us about Cammy. Now, how do you spell Cammy? For those that are wanting to go and Google it or look up your website, let's just cover that one.
Kami.
Excellent. Okay, and you guys are, is it kamiapp.com?
Yes.
Yeah.
And it means paper in Japanese. Okay.
I did not know that. Okay. So tell us a little bit about the business. When you're founder and CEO, how did it all come about?
Yeah, my founders and I, we were, this is when new form factor devices were all coming out, and we were spending all of our money, all of our savings buying them and lining up to, buy the latest iPad, etc. And it was then that we started to take notes and realize, there's really no good software to take our notes, to do our study, to collaborate with each other, to ask each other questions, when we're cramming for exams. And that's when we decided we got to do something about it. So it was from that point that we started coding up our own solution, as engineers would do. And we just started making it, sharing it amongst our class, and everyone started using it. When we launched it, there were a lot of teachers in particular that wanted to also adopt this in their classroom. And that's when we realized, there must be something here. So we redeveloped it, redesigned it from scratch to be something a lot more generic and adoptable by the mass market. And when we launched it, most of our users started coming from overseas, surprisingly. So we had never advertised. We don't have any money early on, right? We had no investment dollars.
Right.
We were eating ramen noodles and everything. And but we had all these
nothing wrong with that. Unless it's the only thing you're eating.
Yeah. And when we launched it, it just blew our minds that there were people willing to use the software, however bad it was. It had no log out button, had no forget my password at that point.
Yeah.
And but people were willing to use it to solve a problem that they had. And that really showed us that there was a real problem here that these teachers encountered, and it was basically they had all these documents and worksheets and resources that they want to give to the kids, but there was no easy piece of software for them to be able to do that and have these kids also complete the work, collaborate with the teacher, do group projects, to engage with each other, have conversation. That software just didn't exist. So we were the best solution, and they were just going everywhere and trying everything. And that's how we started. So today we have almost 8 million sign-ups and users all around the world.
Congratulations.
Most of them, thank you, are in the United States. Our staff headquarters is here up in Parnell, but we have staff all around the world as well that help us and support the software. And it's getting used predominantly in kindergarten to grade 12. schools, and they use it because they've got devices already. So you've got Chromebooks coming into New Zealand schools. The rest of the world has something similar, and all of these devices need software to run, and we're that replacement for paper.
That's great.
So that's why our company is called Paper in Japanese.
And so there's a free level of the software, and then there's a paid level. How's that journey going to convert your as many of your user base as possible onto a paid subscription? And it's obviously key to your success, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a freemium-based product, so there's always a free version available for you ever. It's ads-free, so as a teacher or a student, you can start using it right away. And for a lot of these people who are just adopting technology for the first time, the free version will work absolutely great for them. But as they start to get more advanced with the use case, let's say they want to implement video or audio annotation into their class and exercises, or if they want to use things like text-to-speech or dictionaries built into the Kami app, then that's sort of when you get to a point where you upgrade to our software. Yeah. So we've got an amazing paid version of Kami that's getting adopted throughout lots of school districts in the US. So we have over one in every 7 schools in the US are actively using Kami already.
That's great. And tell us a little bit about that sort of startup journey, raising funds, and those sorts of things. How does that look?
Very first time we raised very minuscule amount of money from someone who just finished up, came to New Zealand, wanted to retire and start an accelerator program. So we raised $10,000 from him, and that lasted, surprisingly, 6 months. This is when rent was a lot cheaper and everything else was a lot cheaper.
Well done.
And afterwards, we really went on this journey where we were working full-time somewhere else and working on this part-time, trying to get it off the ground. And we really started raising our first round of capital back in around 2014, 2015-ish time period. And
how much did you raise at that stage?
$500,000.
Yeah.
So it wasn't a lot.
Yeah.
It lasted us, we're still paying ourselves peanuts. At that point, we didn't have many staff. It was just really a couple of us working away. And so that lasted about, I believe, 1.5 years to 2 years until we raised our second round of funding, which is of a similar amount. And since then, we've just been growing off of the back of the cash flow that we've been generating. So we've been able to obtain sort of venture level growth on the back of our own cash flow, which is a pretty amazing achievement. We're fairly capital efficient. Luckily, we don't have to pay, the exorbitant rates that you have in Silicon Valley for engineers. It's a little bit cheaper here in New Zealand. And it was only until beginning of last year that we raised a proper round of capital. Yeah. That was 1.5 million New Zealand dollars. And that has helped us propel the growth of the company in the United States quite a bit. And globally now we've got users all around the world, in particular Asia Pacific.
Yep. Now for any listeners that are maybe on their own sort of similar journey, what would be your biggest tip or tips that you could share?
Be hungry and be frugal. Hustle your way through everything that you possibly could to get to where you want to be. Don't give up on your vision early just because it's not working on the first try. That doesn't mean you shouldn't try again. And the final piece of advice is launch globally from day one, which is what we did, and that's where we found our core audience overseas. That's
great, fantastic. Oh well, it's been really good to to hear those insights. Now, when I was contacted by your executive chairman, he mentioned that you were finding a use case tied in with what's happening in Hong Kong, where not only in China and Hong Kong we have a lot of people working from home, but there's schools closed and the like. So how's Kami working in that case?
Yeah, so schools have been closed for over a month now in a lot of different places around that region, and a lot of these kids are trying to learn from like television, from any form of online resource that they can find, and these teachers are also struggling to find a tool for them to enable remote learning. So they're trying everything, and one of the tools that best fits that use case is Kami, because it allows them to collaborate with each other in real time on a document. It lets them leave video, audio annotations, draw on it. So it really just easily, seamlessly replaces paper. And so a lot of these people started to try out our product and then started showing each other. When we picked up on it, by that point we decided it's in everyone's best interest to just make our entire product free for any schools that are affected by coronavirus. If their schools are shut down, we'll give it to them for free. And the response has been amazing so far. We've got tens of schools that have signed up in the last 24 hours. It's the rate of which is growing. There's a huge amount of word of mouth going on right now. And our hope is that they can continue to resume their classes like they would normally with minimum disruption, so that they can still get ready for the exams and high-stake tests.
That's great, yeah, because the impact if they're not able to have some sort of normality is pretty big, right?
Yeah.
People, whether it's missing exams or I guess there's all sorts of aspects there. So that's great. Good initiative.
Thank you.
Cool. Oh, well, it was definitely good to get a message through from Bob Drummond to alert me what you're up to. And look, I mentioned it to other listeners too. If you're involved in a tech firm that's doing something cool and interesting out there, feel free to get in touch. It's certainly great to hear about what's happening with top-notch Kiwi innovation, and been really good to hear today about Kami. So thank you. Hey, thanks everybody for listening in. Just a reminder, you can track us down online across most of the social media platforms. We are now on LinkedIn. That's quite new. So if you're on LinkedIn, then go and search for NZ Tech Podcast and hit follow, and we'll keep you in the loop with episodes and other bits and pieces of content. So thank you all for listening in, and of course a special thanks to our show partners that actually make the show possible: Samsung, HP, Sumo Logic, Vodafone, Vocus, and Spark. So it's really great having those firms standing behind the innovation and tech community within New Zealand, and for supporting the show. So big shout out to them. Now, Hengjie, where do people track you down if they want to get in touch?
So I've got a Twitter handle. It's my first name, Hengjie, Hengjie, W. And if you want to track down the company, it's Use Kami app on Twitter, and also on all other social media sort of channels.
Excellent. Oh, that's great. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me.
Have a great week ahead, and we'll catch everybody again next week. All right. See ya.
Take care.